The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below. Hey there, this is your orchestration tutor Thomas Goss, bringing you the third and final lecture on Mercury, the Winged Messenger. When I left off in the last lesson, I mentioned that this last lecture was going to deal mostly with revisiting older material, developing it, repeating it, and so on. Now, there's a very subtle difference in this recapitulation that is coming up. Subtle to the listener. To the musicologist, it's quite fun, really. As you'll remember, the harmonic scheme of this piece, going back and forth between flats and sharps, led to lots of very clever, lots of very fun turnarounds. I likened it to a New Zealand fantail, which is a bird that sort of twists and turns in midair and can change direction at a whim. And that's really kind of what the music is doing here throughout this first episode, which is going to now be repeated. So you might be wondering, well, is this just direct copy and paste? It is up to a point. So right up to here, it is an actual complete and direct copy and paste. From this point on, the music drops a half a bar so that the little run in the bass clarinet can start right on the downbeat rather than halfway through, if you'll remember if you were really studying hard. So this little riff starts a half a bar early. So what? Well, the so what is so that as the music climbs, just as it does in the original, right up to this point, from this E flat, which used to end a bar, leading to a little episode in E major. Instead, by giving the music just one more little group of four notes, one more little tetrachord in sharps, because this is A clarinet, right? We are able to end up on a flat. So we have a little episode here in B flat, with the first harp wending its way down, along with the oboe family instruments. And of course, the flute taking over this lovely cascading theme rather than the A clarinet of before. That basically changes the context of everything from that point on. So even though the elements of each of these little groups, each of these little fragments that coalesce into little episodes, even though they are different in pitch, they're essentially the same in structure. I'm not going to spend enormous amounts of time describing that and describing the way the orchestration works, because obviously this is all just like before. There isn't anything really new to say about the way the instruments relate to one another, except for just one or two little things, like, for instance, how the oboes are replacing the role of the bassoons from the previous. Let's take a look at the next page. So, since the music is climbing to an even higher place than it did before, all the way up to E being this top note here, Holst has got to get back down so that he can get to this squabbling area. And he needs to do that with four phrases to keep it the same as what happened before. However, he's in a very high place at this point. So he uses the flutes to accompany instead of the oboes. The oboes will come in, and from this point here, this is pretty much identical in the way that the instruments relate to each other. So, for instance, oboe and English horn, doubling from below when the second piccolo gets to B flat. And then, when the first flute takes up the cascades going across the sharp keys, the A clarinets support from below in a slightly different voicing than they did, adding to that a somewhat higher bassoon part, tenor register bassoon part. Then this is pretty much nearly identical as to what happened before. What's really kind of cool about that back and forth approach is that this fragmented kind of scoring means that you can copy and paste certain parts and still make things different enough. However, this really isn't a huge copy and paste job at all, because the function of the celesta has changed. Instead of just these silvery notes that are doubling the violins as they wend their way down in support of the theme, the celesta is actually playing along. And note that celesta transposition is exactly the same as piccolo, so these are the same notes all the way through. Now here, harp 2 takes over, and interestingly enough, is doubling the flute an octave higher. And that is such an effective little doubling. This piece is full of really great ideas to use on your own in your own way, and that is one. Obviously not to rip this off or anything, but to see what you can score with harp at an octave higher than flute. That is just such a beautifully charming idea. And then celesta takes over some of the functions of the harp from the original section. So playing triads in support. And then, of course, the harp is taking over some of the celesta function going on after the second harp has played along. The first harp is going to come in and play in flats, an octave higher than the theme in the first oboe. That way we can get to this little squabbling back and forth, dutton, 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 dutton. And it's pretty much, just like before, constructed the same way, only up a diminished fifth. So keeping to that flats versus sharps, the original episode was in a sharp key, and this is in a flat key. Holst does a lot of work to vary the returns of these episodes, the recapitulations of these episodes. So in this case, the strings come in the first time and not the second time. And after doing their little back and forth of tetrachords, E tetrachord to B flat, to E to B flat, ending on a high E flat, what's interesting here is the piccolo and the flute are playing essentially in unison. The piccolo's playing little staccato accents, the same notes that are being hit in the flute, at least at certain points, just to keep the da-da-da-da-da-da nicely accentuated. Another interesting difference here, and that is that instead of winds plus strings giving over to just strings so that you get that sudden change in character, removing the illusion of what doubling means, here Holst adds some clarinets for just a little bit more juice inside this, and keeping things strong all the way to the end. And where is he going from there? We'll find out in a second. But think about all of those differences. You may not actually even hear it the first time through, but this is something that I really want to take a second to talk about, comparing things on your own. I have opened the door for a lot of newcomers to this kind of score analysis with this piece. Some viewers are getting a little too stuck on, say, the quality of the orchestra that I am using for some of these little playback segues. That playback orchestra is just there for a quick reference. It is not there to put a cap on some perfect series of lessons and lectures and so on. I see this series more as something for you to take your first step into your own score reading study of the planets. So I'm happy for people just to take their listening aside after they have listened to this lecture with their own score and just to go over this piece movement by movement, page by page, listening to the recording, and then getting to the point where they don't need to listen to the recording anymore. But that recording is just there for a quick reference. It's not meant to be perfect or anything like that. In fact, I'm kind of glad that it isn't perfect, because I think that if you can hear that there are problems with the orchestra, a semi-pro level orchestra, just a really, really good youth orchestra, the National Youth Orchestra of Canada, I think that by those standards, they're doing a fantastic job. Of course, it's not like Du Trois with the Montreal Symphony Orchestra. Of course not. But they are just putting it out there, and it's very useful for a very quick reference. And you can take any number of great recordings that are hugely polished and compare for yourself. there is a certain amount of realism that we have to come up against in terms of what we are asking from an orchestra. And if you hear a semi-pro orchestra having some difficulties, then so be it. I think that that is a good thing because you learn what are the essential limitations of working with a group that you are likely to work with on your first go as a composer and orchestrator if you are just getting into it. You're going to be working with a lot of semi-pro groups, some student groups, university groups. You're just going to have to get used to imperfection here and there. So let's really not get hung up on that in the comments for this video and other videos, please. Okay? So focus on the music, how the music is being played, which I think they actually do a pretty damn good job with Mercury. And listen for the little differences. Listen for how two piccolos come down instead of just one piccolo giving over to flute and so on. And maybe even refresh your memory with the other video. Go have a listen now to the beginning of the other Mercury lecture and its little musical interlude. And then come back and listen to the way the music plays in this. And then I'll see you on the next screen for a completely new direction to the music. As you might have noticed at the end of the last screen, all of the violins basically gave up the B flat versus A major versus B flat versus A major key signatures going through the section, and they all changed to D major or B minor, however you want to think about it. It's really more of a landscape than it is a tonality in the way that it is being used by Holst. I mean, it's identifiably D major from time to time, but it sort of dances around throughout this entire little episode in a way that is not really focusing on any resting place where you could say, aha, so, this is really D majorish. Some of the ambiguity comes from the fact that we are listening to a low A, which you could consider the 5 of D major. So it's accentuated by a pizzicato note, but a lovely low A in the bass clarinet. On top of that, the strings just go crazy, with this lovely little series of runs going over scales, leaping upwards, cresting downwards, and so on, and sometimes going back and forth over seconds and thirds. And I really love the bustling quality of it. Definitely meant to evoke the idea of fluttering wings. Then we get a bit of mischief, the flute family and oboe family, coming in and playing this lovely contrary motion idea in D-flat major. And at this point, the firsts drop out, and so do the cellos, to really help highlight the entrance of the winds. Of course, the strings come right back in with a lot of ferocity right here. And essentially it is the same pitches once again, but notice how Holst chooses to score the string section in C-sharp major, whereas the winds are essentially running around in D-flat, as I said before. That kind of enharmonics really doesn't make a huge difference, but it's probably a little more convenient for the winds to read in flats there, and for the strings to read in sharps, just because of where they are and where the strings are going to on the next page. Right back to a bustling episode that is mostly based around G major this time. To a degree, this is all planned out to give a little bit of variety, jumping down from D flat to G major. And it's really nice the way that the oboes and piccolos are traded in for bassoons and clarinets, with, of course, flutes still in the game. Now, part of the reason for bringing in flutes and clarinets is so that they can have this lovely tootling quality as they do these little falls across the landscape of G major here. And that is backed up by little 4s against 3s, Holst adding some punch from bassoons, contrabassoon, horns, and trumpet. Notice that the trumpets are marked piano. He's well aware that trumpets could easily overpower everything that's happening here. So he just tells them to just pop a few little staccatos along with the horns. The trumpets shouldn't sound any louder than the pizzicato from the cellos and basses. In fact, it should sound even a bit quieter or under. But I really love this, how these falls just really bring the music down to a new place so that the strings can once again ride on top of this concert A and do more of their little exploring and bustling and burbling around. And then we can go into another one of these little falls, this time over the landscape of a D major scale. So as you can see here, just adding the F sharps and C sharps to the keyless flutes. And then, of course, if you are dealing with A clarinets and you have a B flat in there, that means that the concert key is D major instead of A, because you're adding that one flat. Now notice these little falls in 4-note groups are heavily doubled by the winds, and it helps to maintain the sense of flight, I feel, of something avian, something flying through the air. But basically, really easy to see E, B, and E on top in the divisi firsts, and then below that, B as the top line of the oboe, F sharp and B. We see that in the lower line of divisi firsts. And then here we've got G, D, and then jumping down to a concert G here in the B-flat clarinets. Same thing's going on here in the top line of second violins. And then as the music gets lower and lower, Holst has got to do some trading off. So C, G, and C here in the violas starts off being doubled by the B-flat clarinets. Of course, written D is C, written A is G, and then the first bassoon takes over, going back to bass clef on a C. So it all works together very seamlessly. And if we look over here, it's maybe even simpler in terms of the doubling, with both flutes doubling the divisi violins, and then as we get to here, that's taken over by seconds and firsts as the rest of the line moves into the lower strings, and so on. We don't have to break all of them down. Kind of neat the way that it ends with bass clarinet rather than bassoon. But that's because the first bassoon is needed for these little octave and a fifth, octave and a fourth chords here. All right, so let's listen to all of that. Listen for those little downward swooping phrases here. Listen for the quality of the doubling between the winds and the muted strings. Listen for the way those beats are accented by bassoons, horns, and trumpet. And listen to see if you can actually detect the trumpet in there. It's pretty well balanced, just to be one unified tone here. Listen for the wonderfully bustling strings as they just scorch through very, very light, very, very soft staccatos, and for how the flutes accompany the little dun 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 dun. All right, listen for all of those parts, and I will see you on the next screen. This next screen is really of a piece with the last two that I showed you, and I could have done it all in one fell swoop. However, there are some more things to think about after we've heard that previous episode. One is how the instruments start a little bit lower here with their staccato bantering, and how the lower strings are called in to compensate for certain motion that the second violins cannot actually reach. So here you've got a place where if all of the instruments were following each other in this lovely little parallel motion, the next note for the violins should be an F sharp or G flat, depending on how you want to spell this enharmonically. So in order to reach that F sharp, you would have to tune the G string down. Well, there's no time for that kind of stuff. So basically, Holst just gives the F sharp to the violas and says to play divisi. Now, yes, of course, it'll be slightly weaker, but that's really not a big concern. People really obsess over the smallest little thing not being strong enough by occasionally going to divisi in the violins. And look at how much divisi Holst is using all over this entire suite. It doesn't really rob the strings of that much energy, does it? Divisi does result in a somewhat weaker tone when the strings are competing with massive textures. But in cases like this, they really don't matter. So please stop obsessing over divisi, everybody. I read those comments a lot. Here's an example of how it has to just be thrown in, and it's no big deal. So, having said all that, there really isn't a huge difference between what happened before, except for just this up a major second, down a half step kind of idea. And it really creates a sense of nebulosity on the part of the listener. They're not really sure where all this is going by this point. So it's a perfect time to bring back in the yada-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And that means we've got oboes coming in just like they did before. This time supported by A clarinets. Notice that the top line of the A clarinet is playing the same exact pitch as the oboe. You have to get your A transposition down, right? So written A is the same as F sharp below because it's a minor third transposition, correct? And then here, this D is actually a B, so we have essentially a B minor triad. And it's supported from below by tenor clef bassoons. And then piccolo comes in an octave higher than the first violins. And this also creates a bit of a triad here. The first flute forming the bass note of the F minor triad. And the key signature just suddenly changes to F minor. As things progress, we add more and more instruments to this. Oboes coming back in, English horn providing a root to the oboe notes, bass oboe providing some of the contrary motion, along with second horn. Notice that these are the same pitches, correct? Because this is sounding E flat, down a fifth from the written pitches, and this is also sounding E flat as written but down an octave. And the same thing is pretty much true for bass clarinet as well. F sounding E flat and down an octave. So this little contrary motion line on the bottom is all doubled pretty well. And of course, the bassoons fill in the harmony for the contrary motion, as do the horns, which are actually doubling to a degree what's going on in the violas. Throughout all of this, there is staccato and crescendo, and it's all leading right here to this forte. And I think it really sounds terrific and effective because we are not messing around with any mezzo fortes or mezzo pianos here. You can really tell where the orchestra is going at all times, right? I have been railing against overusing mezzo dynamics for years, and here's an example of why you just don't need them a lot of the time. There's really no need to moderate what you're doing half the time. So everything ends up with this really cool chord here. Essentially an E major with a B root. And at this point, the timpani comes in and starts playing that little drone that we heard before in first violins and then celesta. That is going to lead to a very cool episode that we'll look at in a minute. But first, let's have a quick listen to what happened before. Listen to the way that the strings start to rise upwards, up a whole step, down a half step, and just slowly scratching their way up to the top here. And the way that this little idea comes in one more time and builds to this huge peak right here. Listen to the quality of all of the winds playing together right here, except for A clarinets. And how that creates a very avian-sounding banter with chirping and quacking instruments just playing against and with each other. Now we get to a little section where Holst is going to review a bunch of themes against one another. I want you to think of the principle that he's using here of static sound against activity. When you balance the static against the active, then you get suspense. If you hold back from the audience a sense of going somewhere, but yet you entice them with the possibility of energy culminating in a change, then you get a state where the audience's expectations are suspended. They cannot follow the music to anywhere, and so they are just basically waiting on the edges of their seat for something to happen. And there are great composers and orchestrators who have explored this to the hilt. But I feel that this is one of those moments, once again, very cinematic, describing action, or maybe the potential of action happening at any given time. So that little drone goes on in the timpani for quite a while. It's exactly the same rhythm. It's exactly the same as we heard in the celesta and the violin in our previous lectures. But I feel that it is so perfect for underlining all of these little episodes that are going to flip back and forth. It is extremely suspenseful. The audience is just really waiting for something to happen. And what happens is that da 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 in celesta a couple of times. And then it's answered by bum 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 bum. First by flutes and piccolo, then by oboe and English horn. But in between this action and reaction, both times, we hear the main theme attempting to reassert itself. And I think that the harmony beneath it is actually the coolest part about it. The way that the clarinets provide this little support, taking over from the bassoons at the beginning. And we are sort of back to the fantail, kind of swooping and diving and changing positions in a very playful way. On the next page, we have the entrance of yet another theme, and this was that same ya da 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 dum, which is played starting from a C sharp rather than a G, as it did when it was first introduced, and then repeated umpteen times as the music developed in energy and textural quality behind it. Notice that the da-da-da-da-da reacts to this as well. Meanwhile, the timpani just keeps right on plowing through with its little background drone. However, as it does, the oboe family is just holding on to this lovely little C major chord here. And notice that the relationship to the actual tonality of the B note is becoming farther and farther as Holst plays around with these ideas for the last time. The theme is traded off now to the concertmaster, who is going to play that little solo. Notice C being the dominant of a suggested F major tonality here against B and against a C major chord. Or you could think of it as C mixolydian as well. Now the violins coming in tutti, and then swooping downwards, very similar to the swoops that we heard a page or two ago, along to da-da-da-da-dum, one more time, this time with all three clarinets and oboes and English horn. So let's listen to all of that, this beautifully composed, suspenseful passage. I feel that the timpani lasts exactly as long as it could without really trying the audience's patience. It gives us that sense of suspense as Holst examines all of these themes one last time before he's about to take us to a place where he can wrap up the entire movement and the entire suite from his perspective, having composed this piece last in the series. So listen for all of those things. Listen for the beautiful quality of the instruments against each other in very, very simple scoring, almost chamber music scoring against the timpani drone. And then I'll see you on the next screen. On the next page, we can see that Holst is getting ready to finish everything in exactly the same way, maintaining that sense of intimacy, this time having that B drone of the timpani taken over by the double basses at a B an octave lower, and just hanging on to that. Now, as that B drones, you can see that it is really continuing the sense of not necessarily being connected to the harmony half the time. So it can be a root 5 for the E major ideas that are cascading downwards, but stand as a delicious dissonance to the B flat major ideas. Everything is simplified in terms of texture, and this is a really good lesson, once again, in cinematic scoring, how less can be more. It can really express a lot more. So Celesta wandering its way down in these cascading themes, going back and forth between flats and sharps, accompanied just by first and second harp, depending on where the tonality is at for each little phrase. Here we can see that the progression of the chords is really maintained across these octaves. You can see B flat on top of all of these, B flat 6/3 chord, and here we've got an E 6/3 chord. So it's really just the same thing, copied and pasted 3 times in ever descending octaves. After the Celesta has had a few bars to state the cascading theme, Piccolo takes over. Now, this is going to be just the very next note. This high B flat on the Celesta is almost as high as it can go. There's also a B and a C above that, but this high C is the highest note on the piano. So this B flat is an octave below that, and played softly on the piccolo, it has a wonderfully folk-like quality to it. Throughout a lot of this shifting and trading off between the instruments, you'll see that they have a dovetailed note that gives way from one to the other, giving the illusion that it's all one player all the way through on some sort of super piccolo flute. And I may have pointed that out just in the way that some of these phrases work, like this written F sharp being the same as this written G in the A clarinets. After we hear this nice combination of piccolo and then flute, plus the accompanying harps, which those instruments really do work together in a lot of ways beautifully. Then a few more little tetrachords followed by downward swooping arpeggios, picking that fragment of theme that most favors either flats or sharps, depending on where things sit, with bassoon accompaniment, and then as the whole idea jumps up to the flutes, another octave, with oboe accompaniment, so it still has that double reed feel all the way through. I feel this is really beautifully seamless scoring. The more open sound of the clarinet will easily go up to the flutes without much of a sense of change in timbre, and the oboes, also being double reeds like the bassoons, will tend to have not a seamless tone, but a nice sense of continuity. And that leads right here to my favorite part of this whole movement, and that is these octave chords ascending in the two little tetrachords, the B-flat tetrachord going to the E tetrachord, all the way from this low B-flat to this top E on the piccolo. As we go up, at the beginning of each bar, the instruments dovetail into one another, quite seamlessly, but still you'll hear a vast difference in the timbre as the idea gets higher and higher. The bass oboe's role here is so essential that, of course, Holst has scored it out in mini notes to be taken over by first bassoon and then first clarinet in A, just in case the orchestra is unable to get a bass oboe. But you can really see that same battalion-style scoring that I've mentioned before from Mars, the Bringer of War, where the instruments just work in groups, playing octave chords that represent the way that the music is scored for the piano. Now here, of course, obviously nobody could play these octave chords this fast on a piano with just one hand. So this is all four hands of the two pianists writing this octatonic idea all the way up to this top E. Notice how Holst goes just an extra half bar so that he can end up on a high E, which allows him to bring back this octave harmonic E here. It's really a lovely idea of wrapping everything up so that he can just add a few more little bum, 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 da-dun, da-dun kind of ideas at the end, trading back and forth between celesta, then middle strings, then first harp, and then bum, 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 going from B flat to E one last time. We hear that same lovely idea of pizzicato accentuating a very, very low note in a low wind instrument, which is an extremely effective idea. The bassoons come in with a 6/4 chord above, and we see the full realization of that harmony in the bassoon family here in the left hand of the second harp. This big tutti chord at the end is actually very, very soft. It's almost like the whole orchestra is plucking. A sense that you get because of the octave E pizzicatos in the strings, and then just the very light punch of all the other instruments. All of these pitches are really, really obvious. The octave E's in the C trumpet, and the same thing for the harp, and those voicings there on the second harp, and so on. It's all pretty basic. I'm hoping that your score reading skills are improving as we're going through this series of lectures, which is just a fringe benefit of having looked through all this music with me, is that hopefully your visual skills, looking at a score and understanding exactly what you're looking at, are improving, as is your sense of transposition. For instance, I'm hoping that when you look at this F sharp in the English horn, you think of a B, right? Or if you look at these octave Gs in the A clarinet, you think, oh, down a minor third is E, and so on. Or even, hopefully, B-flat clarinet. If you think of a D-flat, what is down a whole step from D-flat? B. And the same thing for the bass clarinet, which fills in this hole right here. So adding the bassoons together with the bass clarinet, you get two E-fifths stacked on top of each other. Anyhow, I could pick that apart, but I really enjoyed looking at this particular movement, and I feel that Holst has got a wonderful sense of momentum here. Not just because he's writing something that's light and fast and fun, but also that he just really, really wants to get this whole suite finished with and in the bag. And so he's writing on a huge roll here. The energy has been building up, and he is getting it out of the way. Once again, I'm not saying that he was tired with the whole thing, but just that he knew that he was bringing things to a close, and he was really enjoying himself. That doesn't necessarily mean that it was completely easy to write, but it's almost a form of stitching together ideas, stitching together little groups of thematic material and ways of contrasting things against one another. And in a way, that makes this movement quite a contrast to the ones that are on either side of it, where in the case of Venus and Jupiter, the musical material is very well integrated, and one concept, one approach leads to another with very deliberate form, rather than the seemingly chaotic fun that we're having with Mercury. I'm really looking forward to showing you Jupiter in maybe about 10 days to 2 weeks for both the Patreon crowd and the YouTube viewers. But for now, Have a listen to the last couple of screens with me now and check out how all of these little thematic elements start to fragment away into almost nothingness till there's nothing left to do but just finish on a little punch, which is pianissimo, right? Just very, very soft all the way through. Listen to the way that the battalion-like groups play octave chords in runs and dovetail into one another, my favorite part of this whole movement. And how on the previous page, all of the tiny little elements just become more and more chamber music-like as they are revisited one last time. And then I will see you soon for Jupiter, the bringer of jollity.